Well, hello everyone! Like a bard who had to seduce the guard to get into the king's treasure room, I am once again thoroughly exhausted from the amount of exerted work I had to do. But welcome back, everybody, to Forgotten Table Tales, episode 19. I am your DM, Garson, and with me is my co-DM, as always, Chitter Charmer. Chitter,
Oh, hello there. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, I guess. I'm the only one who can hear you. That's
Fair
okay.
enough.
That's okay. Okay, folks. So last week we took a little bit of an interlude to talk about the Chris Perkins and I forgot the other guy's last name, Watson,
Jeremy Crawford?
Crawford and Perkins. Sorry, we talked about Crawford and Perkins joining up with Darrington Press. They are no longer working on Wizards of the Coast, and we probably went into a little bit of a tirade talking about what the future of Wizards of the Coast is going to be about. But I think all in all, it was probably an episode I'm really happy about. But this week, we're getting back to our topic at hand, and that is how to make a campaign. Now, the previous episode we talked about this was about setting. And now we said it was the backbone of everything. Now we're going to move on to the skeletal structure of a campaign, and that is the story. The story is how everything is set up. The story is how it flows throughout the body and how it interconnects and how from point A to point B, how your characters are going to interact with the setting that you've established already. Now, one thing I want to say before we get started on this topic is story is subjective. That's just the long and short of it. There's no real way to write a story that's perfect for everybody because everyone's going to have their own different takes. They're either going to have their own likes, their own dislikes, and it's going to be one of those things where you really just don't know what's going to work until you try it with your pod. But I could go into that for a while, but I'm going to let Chitter tackle that subject first. And then we're going to just see how the episode goes and share our examples of good stories. Chitter, go ahead.
All right. So, Garson's right. Storytelling is very, very subjective. You are not going to be able to tell the same type of story with one group as you are with another. Just like how one type of director with a movie is going to do better with certain types of movies, like Michael Bay with explosions or Quentin Tarantino with feet. I mean, what?
We've all heard that rumor before. It's true, folks. Look it up.
But aside from that, a story has a lot going into it. And what I believe can be one of the most important things that you need to do as a DM is not only talk to your players about what they expect, talk to them and show them what the setting expects. And that might be a little strange for some people because what do you mean what the setting expects? It's not a person. It's a little more complicated than that because a setting's expectations set up how you interact with the world. What types of stories are possible? What types of plot lines are possible? What kind of big bads are possible? And I want to give a few examples of different types of expectations, and so that we can kind of see what I mean by that. So I'm going to start with an expectation that I'm sure everyone's heard of: Lord of the Rings, basic high fantasy. Now, the thing with Lord of the Rings is that magic in that world is typically very passive and big monsters are very, very uncommon. They set this up very well where big threats are seen as either like forces of nature or done by Sauron himself. But it's seen as very much a case of early on the threats are very low stakes compared to the end of the movie. However, an expectation shifter is when uh, Gandalf faces that Balrog. Do you want to know what set the expectation that so many people notice? The entire party is scared and caught off guard. Even Legolas is caught off guard, and he's been around for thousands of years. That sets the expectation in your mind. If you were to go into this world playing it, that is extremely uncommon. That if you're going to be facing off against something like a Balrog, you are going to not be expected to come back, or you are a legendary hero. Now, going on further to a different world of expectation, the Forgotten Realms. That one has magic being a lot more common. Spells like Prestidigitation or Cure Wounds are first level spells. You can learn them literally right off the bat. They are basic spells, and there are dragons, even like the fairy dragon or wormlings or whatnot, that are very much within a beginner adventurer's capability to survive, along with maybe even a couple commoners if they get very lucky. And that sets up the expectation that magic is a lot more intuitive into the world, but there are limitations to what you can do. But also that things like a Balrog, if they were to be introduced into that world, would be seen as less of a threat. They would still be a threat, don't get me wrong, but they would be seen as less of a stand still and I don't know what to do kind of threat. Am I making sense so far?
A little bit, but I think the important thing to also distinct between magic, high fantasy with Lord of the Rings and D&D with the massive amount of monster scaling. You are right. If you look at the Lord of the Rings, the Balrog is probably the second most famous monster in that entire series next to Sauron. Everyone knows at least those two. I don't think you can really, and maybe orcs. But when it comes to D&D, we have a biome of different creatures, different magical stuff, all of that. And it doesn't really translate well from the high fantasy that Lord of the Rings sets up for storytelling. So in that regard, you are right. The story, we are like, if you expect to have, like, when people say we want to have a Lord of the Rings style campaign, they don't know that doesn't mean there's going to be a lot of fight. There's not going to be a whole lot of fighting big monsters. It's like army versus army, turn the tide of the battle. You shall not pass type of deal. So I think in that regard, I get it. What I don't get is how you translate that to a campaign. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Absolutely. And this is something that I did want to go into expanding upon the expectations going a little bit further. So, going to a third example, just to do the rule of three. I'm sure you've heard of Scott Pilgrim Saves the World, that whole franchise.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
Now,
Love that franchise.
exactly. But here's the thing: that world is ridiculous. The world has the world goes out of its way to set up the fact that there are no expectations. And that can be very difficult to do in and of itself because it's breaking rules instead of following them. Now, the one way that they do that is they set up a scene where Scott Pilgrim and his band are just watching this know nothing indie band just on their last song just knock out a crowd of 50 people out of the blue, and that's just seen as like a typical, oh, that's a tiny problem that we need to deal with. And then he can go into a super mega ultra combo and he's still seen as an absolute loser. Something that would make a fighter cream themselves to be able to do with their action surges and second wins and multi attacks and everything is seen as something that a loser can do. And that kind of sets up the scale of low expectations in terms of action to holy crap, this is amazing expectations for action. Now, as you said, bringing it back towards, well, how do you run a campaign with that? Well, you need to set up those expectations early. Session zero is a great way to do that because it will set the majority of those expectations. Like, for example, how many spell slots you get, whether magic is seen as taboo, that will be a huge one dictating it. Whether magic is seen as common, That's another one that will set it up amazingly. And setting that up within the story. And that will dictate what types of stories you can do. You can't really run a team of wizards in a world where magic is seen as taboo and uncommon unless you really, really are doing one specific storyline of like espionage or stealth. You can't really do anything else with that. So that's setting up that kind of storyline, but also it will dictate what types of big bads you're going to do. Because, like I said, a Balrog would not be seen as a death-defying monster in a D&D world, and especially not in a Scott Pilgrim world. It would be seen as maybe an inconvenience. So you need to setting those expectations will also set up what types of big bads you run with, what types of stories you want to tell. And there's nothing wrong with telling the same kind of story. Like if you want to tell a story where a hero goes from a nobody to a somebody, you need to work it out where the expectations of the world play with the story. The character gets more and more capable, but not just more capable, but also more extraordinary. And those two things can play vastly different into what that character can do based on the world that it's in.
So I want to. I'm going to get into this a little bit later in the episode, but I want to also point out something that what Shitter is saying makes sense for D&D, Pathfinder, uh, Age of Dark Fantasy. There's a ton of tabletop RPGs that we could go into. Like Conan the Barbarian has something similar to that, where it's more muscle and might, but there is some magic. And there is even like a lot of the stuff where you're talking about, it sets up the expectation of what you're playing. When you make a story campaign, it's very important to do one thing, as Jenner mentioned, and that is before you get into the campaign proper, make sure the players know exactly what you are getting into. I know it's a very simple rule, but I think it's important to know that because there have been to give you an example. This is like me, Garson's going to tell story time right now. So back in fourth edition, I was doing a lot of Adventurers League weekly stuff, mostly because I didn't have a static group. The weekly campaign, the last one I played at fourth edition was a campaign where I was playing a bard, and I was getting like and we were going down this enchanted path to an enchanted forest. When we got down there, we ran into 7 leprechauns. Okay, it's not real. So it's like you were going to the Feywild, right? 2 sessions later, the DM decides to take things a little bit differently, and somehow we end up no longer in the Feywild. We ended up in the 9 Hells, in Avernus. And there were demons. We were level 4
Huh.
at the time. Now, I'm not saying that it couldn't be an interesting story, but but my character was like a bard who was playing a lute who joined the party to go off and have a grand adventure with the Feywild because he had a connection to the Feywild. I lose that as a character, and now I'm fighting demons. My character was not designed to fight demons. Not, and I don't think anyone's ever prepared to build a character to fight demons. But you get what I'm saying. There is a point where if you are changing the story for you as the DM, you are ruining it for your player. So make sure that they understand. Listen, session 0. Here's what the story is going to be. We're not going to like when we're doing our campaign and session 0. I told you there are going to be moments where we are going to go to different worlds. We're having a multi-dimensional story. It's all based around Magic the Gathering. So they're all worlds that are real in Magic the Gathering. If you know it, great. If you don't, here's the reason why it's set up this way. I told him about the Omen paths. I told him about the March of the Machine, how we went afterwards on that. So I made sure that everyone was aware of that. And then everyone still built a character, and then there have been some good moments that came of that. I think, like, Keza meeting the god, Crufix, the god of mystery, and gaining her astral power because the god was like showing her that the future is unwritten and then there's not really like one path set before you. And then I took that concept and I rolled it into our destiny vote system. So if you've been paying attention, there's a good story beat there. But I set the groundwork up, but I don't tell anyone what the final product is going to be. I think that's the best thing that you can do as a DM. Set the groundwork, make sure that everyone who's playing the game knows the groundwork. They don't need to know all the story details, just what the baseline is going to be.
Yeah, you need to set that expectation
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise, like for example, I'm going to say this with Keza. There are certain things that you did within the prologue and episode 1 where if you had not established them, Keza's story and even Vin's story for that matter would not have been able to happen because the thing is that in canon MTG lore,
Mm-hmm.
you the Phyrexian oil, when Norn disappeared, went completely inert. No one can do anything with it, and magic just kind of moved on. We both kind of subtly agreed that that was boring.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that within the very early parts, we established no, the oil is not magically inert. It's just lacking purpose right now. Like people can still mess with it. We've had Phyrexian golems, we've had the toy maker, we've had Keza's thing, we've had Vin's serum, we've had all this stuff,
We've had
and that's
we've had Orthox, the enchanted magical train that had the soul of a bull in him, and he was carrying Phyrexianized oil, and then we brought that back, and then that happened because of that. But we just
and
but yeah,
I believe there was even the mention of
Yawgmoth,
Yawgmoth,
yeah, Yawgmoth. Who, if you
which
for those of you who don't know who Yawgmoth is, I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler. He's the original god of the Phyrexians, like the big guy who made them all. Again, if you don't really follow the MTG lore, this isn't really that important, but for context.
yeah, but it's very interesting that you brought it around to that because Keza's stories, Vin's stories, Orthris's stories, everything, if we had followed it to the letter of what MTG did, which we both agree is a little stupid,
Mm-hmm.
but that's neither here nor there for storytelling. It couldn't happen. That story could not exist. And if we did try to make it, it would be ruining the expectations of that world because we already established the expectation that it was inert.
That is true. And I think a lot of DMs, new DMs, this is not like if you've been doing this for a while, you probably already know this, but for new DMs in particular, the thing you have to remember is you are a storyteller. You are a storyteller who is trying to basically write a feature length novel that includes your friends as characters, and their decision is shaping the story as you go forward with it. That is a very hard thing to do because if you are not a writer, there are times when you are going to second guess yourself and want to stay to the narrow path and you don't want to branch out. I get that. It's easier to do it safely that way. But you are having to understand that with that comes consequences. The consequence is you yourself are going to know that you're not really going to have that. You're going to miss out on some story elements that way. And it's never, and with one simple change, and that was the oil is not gone magically. It's just lacking purpose, or it doesn't have a praetor to control it. Would probably be that was what my thing was, that it needs a praetor to control it. But I shifted it down the road. The point is that that story now has an element that is wholly unique to itself and has had great character moments for it. So don't be afraid to try some small changes. That's all I would say on that regard.
Yeah. And the thing is that with this, and I'm just going to come out and say it, with Vin's serum is going to be another character moment coming from that. And we've discussed this.
Mm-hmm.
That wouldn't be possible. Like this whole aspect of the character that is coming up with would not be possible if the oil was inert. This whole character's growth would not be possible. It would have to take an entirely different route, an entirely different story. And that's what makes it fascinating. And it's all about those expectations that you set. Because if you don't set those expectations, then then you're basically saying, I'm open. If you are the type of DM, and again, this is a rookie mistake. If you say to your players, I'm open to anything, that is the biggest mistake you can make because you're not open to anything. No one is. If you say, if you are running a typical Forgotten Realms story and someone says, I want to be an astral elf, and I have the thing to do that involves my home plane or my rock in the astral plane. It's like, huh? What are you doing? Because those expectations weren't established. If an astral elf shows up at and you're like a level 2 party, yeah, that could be something interesting down the road. But if you're wanting to do that right away and you're not setting those expectations with the player that might not be feasible, that could run into some very big problems.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. And I think that's definitely something that we need to remember about all of that. Is that there's never going to be, I want to say this properly, so I'm just going to try to phrase it. There's never going to be a moment where you're always gonna have to play it on the fly when it comes to your characters as well. And your story needs to have enough branches, not to be take away from that, but just to give people the opportunity to express their story to feel satisfied. If you at the end of the campaign have made your players satisfied with how their character came out, with their personal journey, and then the story itself, then you did a good job. Even if it didn't go exactly as planned, you did your job. Because unlike most games, tabletop RPGs are not games you are meant to win in the traditional sense. You can finish the campaign and probably win that way, but there's never like an end goal. There's just, we finish this story, now we go on to the next story. Or we make new characters and tell a new story.
And that can be really difficult for some people to understand because they're used to, I won the game.
Mm-hmm.
But also, there is one other thing that I do want to bring up that's very, very important. And this is something that I think. Oh, one moment.
I'm alone now. I don't like it. But in small, but okay, so to give like everyone a small thing while we're waiting, to be perfectly fair, I be I know. But all right, so to give you an example of other storytelling I want to basically set up for before we go any further with what Chitter's talking about is on top of having the expectation of what your story is going to be, the other thing you need to understand is that your game story can change drastically based on what your game is. I'm going to go into that a little bit later down the road. Trust me, it's going to make a little bit more sense once I explain it. But just to know this, a story setting of knights and valor in D&D does not work for a game like Cyberpunk. A game of high seas exploration on a massive ship to sail across the oceans in Legends of the Seven Seas, which is a pirate themed tabletop RPG, and that's a really good one, does not work in Mutants and Masterminds, which is meant to set up for a story about superheroes, supervillains, and stuff like that. What I'm getting at is that you're like, obviously it seems like that's a pretty self-explanatory thing, but just understand this: if you're trying to tell a story that's equivalent to like an anime in a game world that doesn't work for it, and you just change like, yeah, yeah, if you try to put it like an anime story in like a setting that doesn't fit it, or if you try to copy something you saw and you try to put it in a world where it doesn't fit, just scrap it. I mean, you can put your creative mind into it. Yes, there is that. You could do that. But the problem is that if your creative mind is able to pull that off, you probably have changed so much that it's probably going to be a little bit different. That's honestly my deduction on that one. But hey, I'm just saying that's pretty much just how I would view it.
Yeah. And bouncing off of that is that it's always good to take inspiration from different types of media. We all do it. We all take different types of inspiration, but however, we also need to recognize that that inspiration needs to be that inspiration. If you're expecting to bring a one-to-one character, no you're not. You're not going to be bringing a one-to-one character. You're going to be bringing an interpretation of an interpretation. And that needs to fit into both the expectations of the world and also what the story actually is. Your character will not be going through the same growth. Your character will not be doing the same things. Your character is going to be doing what your character is going to be doing. It is not the same.
True. And on top of that, I actually wanted to just ask. I just want to pivot to this part. We've set the expectation for the story, and we've set the standard that storytelling is subjective. We're not going to tell you exactly how to write an amazing story right off the bat, for one simple reason: we can't do that. Because if I were to tell you a story from something I thought was really good, Chitter here would probably give you a different story and say that that's that good. Now, I may like it, she might not, or I might not like it, and she might. The point is that because it's so subjective, we just can't tell you exactly the best course of action or on the best story to write. That's just, yeah, no story is considered perfect, basically. So we're going to take
Yeah.
things a little bit differently in this approach. What we're going to do is we're going to give you some examples of stories that from games that we've played that we like, and we're going to include games that are not just D&D, obviously, because, well, like I said, we want this show to be more than just D&D and the type of it. D&D is going to be our main one, but we want to show you that there are different ways to tell a different story that's really good in ways you probably wouldn't imagine. So, Chitter, I'm going to ask you directly this one question. In
Yes.
a couple of, in just like, in your own words, what was the one story that really drew you into the game? To a game. It doesn't have to be D&D, but just like in general, a campaign story that was really good.
A campaign story that was really good. And we're going like outside of tabletops as well.
We can go outside of tabletops. I don't think there's any reason why that wouldn't be the case.
Then one of my absolute favorites is the Spider-Man games on the PlayStation, the Insomniac ones.
You want to go into more detail about that, or
Yeah, I do. The Insomniac Spider-Man games were very interesting because not only were they a unique spin on the Spider-Man take, like, we're all used to Spider-Man being a teenager and having to figure out high school and whatnot. No, this was a Peter Parker who was trying to find work, found work with Dr. Octavius, which we both know how that ends. But it was very interesting to see us be able to sympathize with Dr. Octavius and see a living world where it was much more mature, even though the cast hadn't really changed. Like the names hadn't changed, but the cast had, if that makes sense.
and so like that's a great story. I actually have played some of Spider-Man 2. I played more of the first one and some of Miles Morales, but it's a good game. I do recommend it, and if you can, it's on sale right now on Steam, so pick that up. But here's the thing I want to translate back to. You can't tell a story. You can tell a sort of story like that in D&D, but the setting would not allow you to tell the exact story like that in D&D. It would have to be in a
Oh,
completely different game setting.
oh no, not at all. A story in D&D that I really liked was a it was a elf who had been turned into a half Drider mix by Lolth, and she was transformed within the streets of Ravnica,
Mm-hmm.
and she was left to die, which, again, sounds really fucking familiar. And I tend to recycle some story notes sometimes, if you haven't guessed.
Oh, that's okay.
But
Everyone recycles. That's the other thing to mention to new DMs who are writing stories. recycle stuff. If it doesn't work in one setting, it doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It just needs to find its place. So keep a journal of ideas that you have for stories. Just even if it's short form stuff, I swear you will find a place for it eventually. It's going to be great.
Yeah, and then eventually it went on to be this very heartwarming moment where they went off to actually find their family, who were all Driders, and they were accepted, and they found a lovable, crazy wife who is explosive and technological, and they found rings to live forever, and then they defeated Vecna. And that is just, it was a crazy, wild story from start to finish. And it all started with the idea of, what if I had a character wear a mask, but it wasn't because they wanted to protect their identity? Why else would a character wear a mask? Because they're ashamed or afraid. What are they ashamed and afraid of? Well, let's see here. Drow typically can be converted into Driders. So what if it was an incomplete Drider, and then it just went on from there, and it was still within the established lore of the world, and it made it very interesting because it was an approach on that idea that not a lot of people would think of.
So I would say that that's a good story. Yeah, and it's a simple one at that, but it allows you to express your character in a variety of ways that you don't feel pigeonholed as well. And simple stories allow that as well. Now, I got something similar, but mine's going to be a little bit longer. Do you mind if I go into it?
No, absolutely not. How dare you talk about stories in the story podcast?
We probably, you know what, if people like this episode, we should just do a separate podcast where it's just you and me telling stories from tabletop games. But I think we would run out of ideas after 10 episodes, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's where I'm going to go with this one. So as you all know, by the massive amount of my aesthetic that is cyberpunk, including things like, not limited to, my robot arm, and my neo-quiche looking coat and all of that stuff, and the fact that my eyes are lenses. That's right, folks. If you zoom in, you can see the fact that my eyes are camera lenses. You're probably wondering, how did Garson get so involved in cyberpunk stuff? Because there is no one out there that has not asked that question. Garson, why do you love cyberpunk so much? Well, I will tell you. It all happened because of one campaign book. And I'm going to show this one to Chitter as well, and I'm going to show everyone here. I'm not going to hide this one. This is probably one of, if not my favorite, tabletop RPG books. Even though it does not look...
Already?
Alright, so let me just try to... Oh, I got to adjust this real quick. So, let me just super quick, so everyone can see... Nope, not that one. There we go. And there we go. This is the actual PDF scan that I made of one of my favorite campaign settings of all time. This is called the Renraku Arcology from Shutdown. Now, for those of you who are not aware of this, this was a small campaign book for a game called Shadowrun. Now, some people consider it a less optimized version of Cyberpunk. I kind of agree, but the book was amazing. The story basically goes like this. This is set in the United States, in a far-off future about 200 years down the road. What happened was that there was an event called the Great Awakening. Essentially what happened was magic came back into the world one day. But cyberpunk aesthetic also grew along with it. So, people had embraced cyberpunk body augmentations, and you could cast fireballs. That's what made the game kind of appealing to me, because at the time I was only playing D&D. But then I found this book. This book is about something known as the Renraku Arcology. It is essentially a man-made city built into the heart of downtown Seattle, Washington. It's run by the Renraku Company. Essentially, it was supposed to be an all-in-one living expense, where basically you live there, you work there, your children grew up in there, you never had to leave the company. It was an all-in-one living facility for everyone who worked for the company. But one day, on December 24th, the doors shut. The whole thing just went on lockdown. There was no way in, no way out. And what happens inside this book is the results of why the shutdown happened. And I gotta tell you, this book engrossed me in the storytelling. So you can already see right here, this happened on around Christmas. This was the peak busy shopping season for the people in the mall. These were people who were part of the complex, and you probably are also noticing they're dead.
Just a little bit.
You also may or may not notice the massive security robot in the back with the chainsaw arm. Possibly related to the fact that they are dead. But here's the thing you may not note. But here's the thing that got me. Look at this. Look at the framing of the scene. You see these two guards out front who are wearing like sumo wrestler attires, and they have these bands on these arms, and they clearly know what's going on, and they're standing. And they're standing in front of the gate, and they are watching the gate happen. They're not helping these people. Why is that? Here's why we find out. As we scroll down, we find out about what's going on in the arcology. Take a look at this. We're looking at we're looking at force modifications, body horror. We are looking at hybridization of technological advancements caused by what's happening inside this living complex. But it gets so much worse because as we go on, not only do we have what's going on with the background story, which is actually told like in message boards, with like old school message boards that you would see like in the 1990s, which you see right here, which is just like, by the way, these old books were filled with fucking flavor. I love old books so much. And then we see stuff like this, which is this small kid who gets attached to the giant robot, the giant super dog robot. But this is what you see as the player. For the DM, by the way, this is what it looks like. For the DM, what we find out about is that inside this megastructure, this giant city that you see right here, is the one true AI, an artificial intelligence that is so advanced to run the complex that in December, it gained sentience and decided that it was going to become a god. And to do that, it indoctrinated all the children, removed their eyes, installed security cameras into their eyes, and shut down the arcology, meaning no one could get in or get out. And all it did was continue these advancing protocols to make hybridization of creatures to create its own brand of super soldiers. And they're even and how we get in is we actually get in through the only means into it, which is like a forgotten port on the bottom side, and we have to work our way up to the top. This whole setting is designed to basically be like, you are in a survival setting, you have guns, you have body armor, you have cybernetics, you have magic, and it's not enough. None of it's enough. And as you read the book, you get these settings, you get these story moments where you have people like this. Take a look. December 19th, 2055, dozens dead, injured in Seattle's shopping slaughter. It continues to build on this idea and this story as you read more and more of it. It gives you more of these articles. It still is like, for example, even after New Year's, the arcology is still closed. No one can get in. It's been closed for weeks. What is going on in there? And I say all of this because when I played this story, I was addicted to this. Every week when we went to do this campaign, my soldier was going in there with the sole purpose of finding out what happened, because he was like one of those media soldiers, which was something you could make in Shadowrun. They were designed. We went in there to record what happened. We had assault rifles. We had plans. I was the last survivor of our group. I was the last one, and I had to flee the arcology. It was a perilous run. I had cyber dogs chasing me. I was infected with poison from cybernetic wasps that had been infecting the compound. I had to make a valiant last stand in the food court towards the bottom of the mall because it was the only way out. I got out, ran into the middle of the street, and I collapsed. And the medevac unit said at the end of the story that I would not tell them what happened inside that arcology, and I stuck to that. I was telling them, don't go back in. Bomb it, destroy it, cut it off. seal it up and bury it somewhere. And I was like, I never explained the horrors of what was inside that place. But that's the story of the Renraku Oncology shutdown. It's about building up this complex, and the story is you are going deeper into a hellscape that is in the middle of a major metropolitan area. This isn't like going to Avernus. This isn't like going to the Feywild or Mount Celestia. This is reality. This is a prospect that we could face as a creature, like as a society, as creatures of as animals. This could happen to us. And how would we react to something like that? So that's what really got me into cyberpunk, is because there are a lot of things that could be scary about this story. And I only brushed like maybe 2% of what's in this book, but I don't want to get too far into it because it is a very old book, but a very good one. And I might want to run this someday if I can ever find, because I got plans to convert this to cyberpunk proper. But without the gushing element, I just want to say this. That story drew me in, and I became a fan of the genre because of it. And this is an official book. So it's not impossible for someone to find an official third-party story that draws in its audience, and then basically it breaks something into you that you probably don't know about yourself just yet. And I think that's a beautiful thing when a story can do that. Uh, but that's my take on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of story very much shows how someone can take a horror aspect and just tear it to shreds. And it can tear you to shreds because you're going in there knowing that it's going to be horror, and yet at the end of the day, it's so much worse than what you can expect, and that can be an amazing story.
Right. And the thing is that as like to give you some other ideas, like just to show you some more really cool things in the book, they even showcase like what the constructs look like the spider bot or the leech construct. And then it also shows what stuff like the wasp, like the bumblebee things. These were the things that stung me and injected me with poison that affected me along the way. And as you can tell, what adds to the flavor is that these were actually pencil drawings in the book when it was originally released. That was like, look at this. Like the Medusa, which was, it was like a displacer beast that had camouflage. That was how powerful the Medusa was. We fought two of those things back to back. One that was, and both of them were being controlled by a small child who was infatuated with killing us.
Yeah. Yeah. And that just kind of sets up everything. The world, the stories that you can tell in different worlds are fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And
and yeah, no, go ahead, go ahead. I'm just re-looking at the book, and my childhood memories are coming back real quick.
another story that has made me kind of interested is actually the campaign that we're currently running. And that story is very fascinating because it also includes this idea of disempowerment and empowerment in various different ways. And my character is taking that disempowerment in a different way than most people would. Whereas most people would take a very traditional route, where that disempowering makes them feel like they're not a person, and the empowering thing is gaining that personhood back. My character's kind of taking the opposite route, where they don't want to be a person per se, and they want to just be an entity, a creature, an ally. They don't see the value in being a person. And that's very fascinating because it goes against what everyone thinks is normal. And yet to see a character be fulfilled that way makes you question things. That's the kind of story I like, where not just new things are found in you, it makes you question things that you've thought to always be true about yourself or to be true about the world. And you look at it and go, wait a second, why did that work?
So yeah, no, and with our campaign, like what I get out of it is I get to employ my knowledge of Magic the Gathering, which is where a lot of the concepts came from. Because if I didn't have a deep knowledge of that story element, I don't think I could tell the story that we're doing right now. I could probably do some version of it, but I wouldn't be able to know how to include these characters to really, have those deep emotional moments that our players have been having. Like, for example, with the fight that happened against Xenagos, I knew right away Xenagos is a bad guy. He's not a redeeming guy. He's an asshole. Like, the whole part about him is like he killed his sister in the womb because he thought it was for fun. So I knew if we were going to go to Theros, I wanted to have him be like play some part of him because I like him as a villain. But I also knew that'd be kind of weird. How the hell do we bring him back? Because in the main story, it's been pretty much established that he's probably dead. But I thought if Elspeth could come back from the dead, there's no reason why Xenagos can't come back. And because I knew of the story of Magic the Gathering, I was able to pull that off. I think it also goes to show that if you know your story elements well, you can arrange it in a way that would be something different that no one else would have. And that's a good thing. I think that's really kind of an amazing idea that you allow yourself to just lose yourself in the story, but because you know the characters so well, you can make the story your own.
Yeah, it's very much a case of um this, like, for example, with going into the next arc that I have, idea that I have with Keza,
Mm.
and this is just something, this is just a little teaser for what's ahead, is that me and Garson had talked about, well, what if the oil still had retained a little bit of its sentience? What if the oil had like a made the trauma from Kez's life manifested into an altar of sorts in Kez's mind? And it was a very fascinating idea. It was one that we had to, that especially I had to think about, because I was like, is this too much? And then when I was kind of thinking about the storyline that it could go down, because I didn't want it to just be for the sake of body horror. That's never what you want to do with the story. You don't want things to just be for the sake of shock. Sake of shock is a very cheap way of storytelling. Very, very cheap. So the idea that I had for this storyline is that how do I say this? The idea of the storyline that I had for this is that when Ina left off, they were like, Keza just needs help, they don't know the words. And I wanted to be like, okay, what if instead of just Keza doesn't want to be saved. They want to help. They want to aid. They want purpose. They want something else. And they were constantly running up against that wall. And I was like, okay, they're making progress, but it's that wall. How can I get that wall down? And it kind of hit me that it had to be this, because it's not only going to put fear into Keza that their body is not their own unwillingly, but also the cracks in it show that they can help this other side of them, this other person. And that can lead to some very interesting story ideas that I've thought of that could be relatively silly or could break Garson entirely. But it's this, it's taking it's doing what you should with the story, noticing that a character keeps hitting a wall and going, well, how do I get around this wall? Because we've tried multiple ideas and this character just isn't responding to this. And sure, you could go, well, you made the character, just have them respond to it. But it doesn't quite work that way. When you're in the moment, you can plan that. But when you're in the moment, it won't go that way. And you will have moments where you and the DM look at each other and go, we talked about this. What the fuck are you doing? And it's because it doesn't fit the character. And in the moment, character growth is the most important.
Right.
And So for me, I made this because Keza has willingly given up control before. But this is one time where they could potentially be unwillingly giving it up while having something subconsciously ping to fight for that they wouldn't want to give it up for. And then it's that question of why, and then where's that going to lead? And also, this Phyrexian altar is not going to have a haha, complete mindset. There are going to be cracks in its armor. And that brings up the idea of, well, what are those cracks? How can it change? How can it grow? And taking the idea of, and it's again running with the idea of it is incomplete. It is not perfect. It is something that was abandoned. Now Keza is the one who's able to help this figure. And this figure may or may not accept help at first. And that makes sense because it was very much an indoctrinated figure. This is getting to the core of the issue. It's taking the core of the issue, and if the character can't approach it, then you put in a figure that's a representation of that issue. And you make it so the character has to deal with the issue in a different way. And that can be very respectful, especially when you've tried multiple things and it just isn't working. At least not the way that you thought it would. And that's probably the reason that Garson let me have this idea in the first place as a DM, is because we had tried it a bunch of different ways, and I'm like, I'm going to try this way. And I think this works because of XYZ. And he was like, okay, we can do that. It doesn't interfere too much with the story. It can lead to personal moments with new characters and old characters alike. Am I about hitting it on the mark?
A little bit. I also wanted to do it because it sounded like an interesting story, and there were ways I could back out of it if it didn't work with how the campaign was going. But so far, it hasn't really been that big of a any type of hiccup in the story. We've been moving along pretty well. Now, I will say there have been moments where maybe we focus a little bit too much on Kez's side of things, but we are trying to phase that out so that everyone gets their own share of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. The thing is that I definitely expect uh, Kez's thing to be more equal, and with the fact that it's going to be someone with Keza, different people with Keza as well, that brings up interesting moments where they can not only do their own thing, but they can help others with their own thing.
True, and like I said, that allows you to have like a personal moment of growth, continue the story where it doesn't necessarily intervene with anything that's happening, and on top of that, it allows people to enjoy your character. And if you are maybe you're using these videos to help set up a streaming campaign setting, there is one thing I want to make sure that you understand is that your audience is also playing a part in this. They are watching this. Your players are your main audience, but the audience that's watching it, they have to have something to latch onto as you're playing this game. I don't recommend that for just starting out, but if you are a DM and you want to try going that route, make sure that you know how to make the characters work with your story and also have them be entertaining. And Kessa is an entertaining character. I don't dispute that or deny that at all.
Yeah, she is absolutely spectacular and is absolutely a source of humor. Like, she isn't all doom and gloom and edge. She has her funny moment. She has moments where the comedy may be unintentional, looking at you, rolls with doors, but uh the comedy is there, and she's not just edge. And that is
Right.
something that a lot of new writers struggle with, is that you can't have your characters be one dimensional. Even if it's accidental, have them have another side.
So I like the fact you're mentioning multifaceted characters because that actually is a great segue into me talking about my other best story moment of all that got me into tabletop RPGs. Because this is actually from the game I love more than Shadowrun or D&D, and now I can see Chitter rolling her eyes. It's bombastic side eye.
Yeah.
I don't get it. She's folks, I just want to point this out, and you can type this in the comments. But Chitter is always open for new things, and when Garson shows it, it should be interesting. And then she gives me the sigh, And I know she's not paying attention anymore.
No,
Ugh.
I am seriously paying attention. Go
I
nuts.
doubt it now because now I'm feeling sad. You made me sad now. I'm gonna cry.
Don't make me get the bonk hammer. Don't make me get the Neffy.
All right, fine. Don't get the Neffy. Anyway, but let me explain where this is coming from. This is, without a doubt, one of my favorite game series of all time, and that's just pure cyberpunk. Now, some people are going to say, wait a minute, are you talking about Cyberpunk 2077? Kind of. Because that game is based on this. This is the tabletop version of that game. And it's had a lot of different versions. They've had Cyberpunk 2020, Cyberpunk 3072, Cyberpunk Red, which is the version that's the newest version that came out, and is actually the one I recommend people to play. But here's why this is actually a good story. So, this one is actually set in 2040. This character with the silver arm, if you played the video game, that's Keanu Reeves, aka Johnny Silverhand, the most narcissistic asshole on the planet. But essentially, this entire story, this is like a small short story, and I don't really have time to read all of it, but essentially what it is it's talking about the lead up to an event known as the Night City Holocaust, where Johnny and a ragtag group of people led by a character named Morgan Blackhand went into the biggest megacorp tower in the city, Arasaka, and Johnny dropped a fucking nuke on it. Like, and I don't mean this in a, oh, he unleashed like a small bomb. No. Johnny dropped a full functioning nuke on this goddamn corporate building and killed over 3,000 people. The reason he did it and this story explains it, is Arasaka kidnapped his girlfriend and turned her into a digital construct that drained her of her life because she made a program called Soul Killer, whose only goal is to basically kill the target and then trap their mind in a digital realm. That's it. And Johnny was pissed.
I mean, reasonably so.
Right, but the thing is that this is the event that sets up a lot of what happens in 2077, because it introduces characters like Morgan Blackhand, Alt Cunningham, Rogue, Adam Smasher, which, by the way, this is a really nice view of Johnny Silverhand and his Malorian pistol. But the reason why this game drew me in so much is that Night City is the main focal point of the game. This is like, we say this before, but this is the character setting in general. The city itself is the story. These guys could all fucking die tomorrow and nobody would give a shit. Because the reason why I bring all this up is because of one simple thing. If you're playing a cyberpunk story, the tagline is, there are no happy endings. So if you are a story writer and you are writing for a game like this, don't write a happy ending. It's not going to happen. Your guys are going to die. But that's another thing. If you look at this artwork. This screams dark future, dystopia. This screams like high-grade neon and decadence, and you just see like nobody giving a shit. Robotic arms, people who are running like programs, the fear of the mega corporations looking down on everyone. The city will always win. And I love that because there are so many stories that you could tell with this setting that you could not tell in any other tabletop RPG or any game in general. Because at the end of the day, the city wins. It doesn't matter how good you are as a character. You've probably had to backstab somebody. You've had to screw over somebody. Your best friend was killed when they failed the dice check and got their brain fried by the megacorporations. You pissed off the megacorporations, so they send their elite team of assassins to kill you. You've hacked into their system and stole something from them, in which case you're fucking screwed. Or let's say you work for the corporations. Well, you make one mistake and you're ending up in the harbor with cement shoes.
Yep.
But I think the best way to describe this, these types of stories that you could tell with this game, is if you look at this little insert in the book called the Scream Sheets, which is essentially their version of the newspaper. I'm going to read this to you because this is legitimately a disturbing idea. Night City News today. The latest body lotto numbers. They actually bet on how many people died the day before. And if you win, you get money. What streets to avoid for unscheduled demolition? Because someone came around to shoot missiles at it. A blow-by-blow of last night's combat ball game. The quarterback died. An accurate 3-day blood rain forecast. Stories about other people's misfortunes to cheer you up. Or even actual local news about local and world events. Like, they don't even hide it. They are telling you, like, hey, people die. There's blood in the air. But someone's got it worse. Feel happy about that. But to top it all off, and this is the best example of this, let me introduce you to the Sanryu official shotgun.
Oh boy.
Called Hello Cutie. Which is, and I kid you not, an actual gun that you can get in the game, where bring on the sunshine, bring on the smiles. Hello Cutie is here. Wash away that cybercycle frown. Grab your best gat in town. Cutest pink pistol on the market. They'll bleed pink, that's for sure. By Sanryu. Or Sanro. Sanryu, but we can't say that for legal purposes. But think of it like this. When you are telling a story with this game, you have to take that in consideration. This is the world you're building in. There's no such thing as you got on your massive fucking super yacht and we're like, I'm going away from all of this. I am beneath it. There's nothing here in Night City that will keep me here. No, most likely what's going to happen is you're going to get 5 miles off the coast. Someone's going to rob your ass and you're going to lose everything. That's what's going to happen. But it also plays up into that desperation because they make this so obvious that this is supposed to be a joke in the newspaper, but it's a legit gun that a kid would probably buy and would probably own, and he would probably need to use because there's so many cybercycles running around in the middle of the street who are having firefights between the cars, and you will probably get shot at multiple times. And
That's the saddest part about it, is that it's completely realistic.
I know, but see, that's what I'm saying. But that's why I wanted to bring that up, is because when you look at tabletop RPGs, we covered this last time, where setting has to be the thing that sets it's like the backbone of the campaign, and story is the skeletal structure. But this is stuff you have to consider when writing the story. Because this is why we say the setting is always going to be the backbone of it. Because you can't write a story like this in a game like Shadowrun, where things can typically end up pretty well depending on how things turn out. Here, it's mostly meant to be dark. In Dungeons and Dragons, it's the exact opposite. A lot of times the stories need to end on a high note because it's how high fantasy works. You've gone through a big journey, you've changed, you've grown, you've had experiences, but you almost end up with a happy ending. Even stuff like, back to the original example of Lord of the Rings, there is arguments to be made that it did have a happy ending, even if Frodo did go off to the Grey Havens and we're never going to see him again. But Sam had a family. Merry and Pippin are fine. Legolas was there. I don't really know what he was doing there, but for some reason he was there. And even stuff
Yeah.
like the Dungeons and Dragons movie, Honor Among Thieves, it ended on a happy note. He got the kid back. He won. They beat the Red Mage. It felt like a legitimate way to conclude a campaign in Dungeons and Dragons. And this one, your friend probably died because he hit the gas pedal too much and ran off the highway. Meanwhile, Garson says something and Cheddar just freezes up, so I don't know if she's still there or not.
Yeah, I'm still here. It's just been very interesting listening to you about Cyberpunk and Shadowrun.
Yeah, because one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up so much is D&D is good for telling stories about overcoming a big obstacle. Vecna, Aceric, the water Xanathar, if you side with the other guy in the Waterdeep expansion, the goblins of Fandan or I cannot say that name. What was the mine's name again? Fandanville? Fandaniel?
Fandelver.
Fandelver. Okay, thank you. But those are about overcoming great obstacles and succeeding. But you can't really tell a story where a lot of the time the bad guy wins in those scenarios because it doesn't feel like the story was expected to go that way. You were meant to be the chosen one, the savior of the world. There may have been some sacrifices along the way, but you were supposed to have the happy ending. And as a writer, I hate that. I mean, I'm okay with an occasional happy ending, don't get me wrong. But if I have to write happiness all the time, that's not good storytelling. That's mental illness. So Cyberpunk gave me an outlet to write sad stories, but stories that were like we overcame something, but we lost a lot along the way, and we didn't really win at the end. We survived. And I think that's where I want to draw the example, because if you look at other games out there, like, for example, Mutants and Masterminds is meant to be like comic book fantasy, where you're the superhero and you can do a lot of really cool things. But it's also where you might, on occasion, a lot of times you'll run the same thing like in D&D. The superhero wins, there's the happy ending, we return to the status quo for next week's episode. And God bless them, but there are just some times where you don't want to have that. In the last campaign we had before we were doing the one we were doing on Sunday, I ended it on a cliffhanger where I didn't say what would happen to the group. They were trapped in an orb, and then I had the cliffhanger be I was reading from a book. What did that mean? I think it was we won, but we don't know what's going to happen to our group. Are they dead? Or are they somewhere else? Are we ever going to come back to them? We don't know. But I like that ambiguity when it comes to ambiguousness. Ambiguity. Thank you. I'm glad you are a walking thesaurus. But yeah, no. And that's like Cyberpunk has a lot of rich lore. For example, Morgan Blackhand, who is like the progenitor of all of the Edge Runners, who are like the mercenaries that run around in Night City. He was at the Holocaust with Johnny, who dropped the damn nuke on the fucking city, and we don't know what happened to him. And some people assume, well, he died in a nuke. No. Morgan Blackhand is the badass he's like the Ernest Hemingway of fucking Cyberpunk. This dude was like, almost. Shut up. Okay. But this dude was like, he has done a lot of shit. For example, he fought against Adam Smasher, who is a full cyborg. And not only that, Morgan was pretty much 90% human. The only thing he had that wasn't human was a prosthetic arm. And he was a fucking badass. Someone tried to rob him at a gas station one time. He grabbed the pistol out of their hand and then just beat the fucking head in with the pistol. And then when the mates came back to rob him, because they were a group from the gang called the Maelstrom, which are just full cyborgs, he basically just was like, guys, I'm eating lunch. Do you have to do this? 5-on-1, he walked out of there without a scratch. So if anyone could survive a nuke dropping on him, it's Morgan Blackhand.
Fair enough.
But when the raid happened, Johnny died, Santiago died, Rogue got out, but barely. Spider Murphy was potentially... By the way, these are all real characters in Cyberpunk, by the way. I'm not making any of this up. These are legitimately characters. Though, to be honest, you could easily replace them with the characters who are going to the... Who are also supposed to be player characters, because this is a campaign setting you could have played, where Johnny's group went to the roof, and then that sets up 2077. You guys went to the basement, and you were supposed to uncover like some secrets that Arasaka, the major mega corporation, was hiding from them. And I could explain that stuff, but then that's just going way too into lore on this, and we are not a Cyberpunk podcast. This is a D&D, this is a tabletop RPG podcast. So look it up. It's a great read. I do recommend Cyberpunk to anyone who wants to have more depressing stories. And I recommend Shadowrun if you want to try doing a otherworldly cybernetic story. And I recommend D&D if you want to do a high fantasy, the good guys win story. And I recommend Pathfinder if you want to do a story where you have kind of like low stakes, but you're going off to explore vast worlds, because Pathfinder at its heart is a series that I think is perfect for telling stories about going off and exploring than Mutants and Masterminds, or if you want to be like a superhero. The end of this is that the game setting and the story are up to you at the end of the day. There's no right way to tell these stories because they're your stories. And if you have a good one, write it down, set up with structure, figure it out. Maybe it works after a couple of sessions and you don't want to go any farther with it. That's okay. I know we haven't really explained like how to write a story, but it's like one of those things where you can't really explain how to do grammar structure or three-part acts or stuff like that because, well, Chitter could probably do that. Chitter, do you have any recommendation for like how to write a story in that regard?
Um, the simplest thing that I can say is start with a typical story. Oh, one moment.
So yeah, start with a typical story. Write something. Just do like a one sentence pitch for how you want your campaign to go initially, and then just from there grow it. But as Shitter mentioned, respect the expectations, respect the players, respect the characters, and you aren't limited to anything. That's what tabletop RPGs are great at. They are non-limiting game settings. They are creativity incarnate, which I think is really nice.
And just if you're going to follow a story structure, just stick with the simple thing. Have your characters be established, have an action that starts it, have three main things that happen to increase the stakes, have the third thing lead to a big thing that like the big climactic fight, have the end results of that, and then the epilogue.
Right.
Ta-da.
Yep.
There's a simple story structure for you to start with.
But also allows a lot of freedom so that you can write new things. And also know your characters. For example, this is Morgan Blackhand, as I was mentioning. Morgan is fucking fighting against Atom Smasher and literally goes, "All right, Pipsqueak, time to see if metal really is better than me. Let's dance." And goes in there with a pistol and nothing else and won. So know your characters, because you can't write, because not everyone can be Morgan Blackhand. Morgan Blackhand is not going to be your main character. That's going to be that's a legend that you're going to try to make your characters live up to. So know that too. Expectations, people.
Yes, exactly. All right. So, I think we've covered all we really can for today.
I think so too. It was a relatively short episode, but I think that these are just some of the examples that we can include. Next week, we're going to be getting into character creation and how the different mechanics work, and we'll be going into a little bit more detail on that one, so we can offer you some fun ways to help your players create characters that match their personality and their play style. We'll be going over some other stuff, and I'll be going over some more stuff too, because as we all know, when I leave it generic enough, it doesn't seem like I'm lying to you when we have that happen.
All right. This has been fun, and we will see you all later.
All right, everyone. Bye-bye.